Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. In this video, we're going to take a look at prototypes together in JavaScript. While we go through this topic, we're also going to learn a really fancy sounding topic called prototypical inheritance, which is going to set us up really well when we take a look at object-oriented programming and how inheritance works over there and how it relates to this idea of prototypical inheritance. So prototypes in general is quite a tricky topic. It is one of those things that even I would say like senior developers eventually have trouble with and all these different cases. I'm going to do my best in this video to kind of cover the most important cases and concepts behind prototypes so that when you hear this word or you see it being used and try to understand what it's actually doing for us behind the scenes in JavaScript, it sort of starts to make sense and things start to click for you. When we get into object-oriented programming next, we look at the new classes in JavaScript, it's going to make a lot more sense when you understand how prototypes actually work. JavaScript is not actually an object-oriented language. So really it's bolted on to this idea of prototypes, which is actually a concept that's used in many other programming languages. For example, Swift, which is an iOS programming language for building iOS Apple applications, actually is a prototypical or prototype-based language as well. There are many pros and cons to using prototypes versus traditional like object-oriented languages. So there's not always a one-size-fits-all. So it's very important and useful to understand how prototypes actually work and what it really means to have prototypical inheritance in a language. So enough of me yapping, let's take a look at what prototypes are in JavaScript. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of slides prepared for us, so let's get right to them. To start, I want to kind of define what a prototype actually is and what are the things that we're going to take a look at when we actually talk about this idea of prototypes. So when we're talking about prototypes, and sometimes you'll see this defined as prototypical inheritance, which I'll get to shortly, and you'll see why it's actually called that. We really need to understand these kind of three central topics. In fact, it really is this one central topic here, which I have highlighted called the prototype itself, which is where the name comes from. However, in JavaScript specifically, there are these two other kind of cursory topics which allow us to work with prototypes, and you will see these pop up in day-to-day practice when conceptually this is what we need to be talking about. Okay, so I'll show you kind of examples of what I mean because this is very high level and kind of confusing to understand. So let's just take a look at some examples to start hammering this home. All right, so to start, I want to say that I have an object. Let's say that we have something like this. Okay, so we've seen objects before. In this case, I'm saying create an object that has a property with type and a value of monkey, and let's label it as animal. Okay, so animal is pointing to this object right here. So what's interesting about this, right, is if you think about animal, we kind of get this picture right here. I mean, in your mind, we might be drawing like, you know, a rhinoceros or an elephant or whatever it happens to be, which would be fine. But if we think about boxes and lines and what is actually in those boxes and lines, we could probably think of something like this, right? A pretty simple box. We have like the thing that it is, which is animal in this case, and it has a property of type, right? So if we added more properties, they would just kind of come under type, right? If we added a name, it might have a name, it might have like number of legs or you know, fur or something like that. And then it would appear under here and it would all belong kind of to that animal, right? And we could have multiple animals if we wanted to with different types of names. So this is a concept of just an object in JavaScript, which we've seen before. So that's nothing really new. However, what's interesting, right, is that we can actually do this. We can also do this, right? Which is like, how is this possible, right? Because if you really think about it, this is an object and the only property that it has is type, right? So it makes sense to say animal.type. You know what? So I'm going to actually code this out just to make this super, super explicit and we can understand the strangeness before we actually go deep into how it actually works behind the scenes. So I'm going to pull up VS Code alongside this. I'm going to create a new file. I'm just going to call this animal.js. I'm going to create a new animal here. Just going to make sure I have my thing open over here. And then on inside of animal, I'll just say type. What did I have for my type over here? I think I had, where was it? Monkey. So I'm going to say I want a type of monkey. And in this case, you can create whatever type of animal you want. And in this case, it's just going to be a monkey. So if I console.log my animal, just going to pull up my terminal over here, and I'm going to run animal.js. We can see that this is an object that has a type of monkey, which is a string, right? So this is not anything too fancy or rocket sciencey when we're looking at this right now, as long as you kind of have seen how objects work before. So this is fine, right? But check this out, all right? If I do this, if I say console.log and I say animal, I can do this. I can say toString, and I can call this function. Now, I want you to take a look at this before you kind of think of what this does, right? When we're looking at this, we see that there is an animal object, right? And it has a type, which is pointing at monkey, this string right here that we saw, right? But here we're saying that I want to grab another property off the animal object, and that property is called toString, and I'm calling it. So technically I'm saying that this is a function inside of the animal object that's called toString, right? So in theory, this should not work, right? If I was to run this in theory, this should give us an error, right? So I'm going to comment this out for a second, and I'm going to show you what's going to happen if we try this with something else. So if I'm going to say console.log animal and I do .hello, just like this, okay? Now, same thing, right? This doesn't exist. It's not a function that we created. It's not anything in here. There's only type in here, right? And same thing with this, right? Like that probably doesn't exist either. So if I was to run this, I expect to get an error, and I do. I get animal.hello is not a function, which makes sense, right? Because clearly it's not in this object, right? Now, I can do something. I can say animal dot, for example, num legs, right? And I should probably put that in here. If I say number of legs, let's say that equals 2. Okay. I keep getting my syntax mixed up here because I'm getting too excited as I'm explaining this, explaining and typing at the same time. Console.log animal.numLegs. Now, this is going to give us 2, right? And we get 2. We still get the error for hello. But if I get rid of number of legs, right, what we'll see is an error as well, right? We'll see, well, not an error, technically we'll get undefined, right? Which is not what we want, right? If I tried to call this, this would not work because it's not a function. So then I would also get the same issue of the hello case. So the point of all this is that there seems to be, missing properties. And if we have that as a property value, or we have it as a function, we're going to get an error, right? Or we get undefined. In the case of a property value that's not a function and we don't have to call it, we're just going to get undefined, okay? Because it doesn't exist on this object. Now, check this out. If I bring back toString, okay, let me even bring back a number of legs just so that we can actually see this all work, where we're accessing a property that does exist and we're accessing a method that in theory should not exist, right? Because this hello here broke our code. Check out what happens. It doesn't break, right? That is crucial. And this is where prototypes come in. Literally, this is the whole point of prototypes and prototypical inheritance. This function, this method, toString, does not exist on animal, but our code is not breaking for some reason. In fact, it's actually doing something that we didn't code somehow, magically. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through these slides. Now, there's another property that we can have access to. For example, this one right here, which is specifically named has own property. And this allows us to ask if an object has a property within itself and not its prototype chain, which we're going to look at shortly. So for example, if I say console.log, does the animal.has own property? And in this case, I can say type, for example, or I can say number of legs. I'll duplicate this and I'll say num legs. Okay. This is saying, does animal have a property called num legs? Does animal have a property called type? And you can see that we get true for both of these. Okay. If I was trying to do this for something that doesn't exist, like hello, for example, and I clear this console out just so it doesn't run to my face, we'll see that we get false, right? Hello does not exist. Okay. Now, curiously, check this out. If I do toString, right, which should exist in theory, right, I also get false. Okay, because it's not on the animal object itself. We'll see shortly. It's in the prototype. So let's come back here and take a look at what this all means. So when it comes to prototypes, this is the image we need to keep at the back of our mind to really understand this concept. Let's go through this in detail, but slowly. So we have animal, type of monkey. We've seen this. We've seen the animal.toString seems to work, and we've seen the animal.hasOwn property of type seems to work, right? We just saw this code and is doing stuff that we didn't code. So what's happening behind the scenes inside of JavaScript is we have animal right here, right? Which we were dragging around earlier that we saw. Animal has a type property on it. That's totally fine. We're good there, right? That's this right here. This is the blue box. However, behind the scenes, hidden from us, is the fact that animal actually inherits from, which means that it actually has extra properties and functionality on it just because it's an object. So when we create an object in JavaScript, we are using these two curly brackets. Okay, so I want to show you something really quick. If I come back to here and I say const my object, I can create an object like this using curly brackets, or I can create an object like this using this syntax right here. Okay, these are both ways to create an object in JavaScript. Most of the time you'll see it this way. You'll very rarely see it done this second way. So if we take a look at this right here, we did it the first way. When we do that, behind the scenes, what JavaScript does is it sets up the prototype chain for us, which is what we have right here on the right-hand side. Okay, when we have animal and we create it as an object, behind the scenes, JavaScript is going to say that there are these other properties that come with the fact that you are an object in JavaScript, and you can access those by going up to animal's prototype, which is the object by default, because that's how we created animal, as an object. So we can think of animal as having all of its properties, as well as the properties located inside its prototype, which in this case is the object prototype. Now, the object prototype is really hidden from us for the most part. Okay, we can't really easily access it. Okay, but this is technically what it looks like. And usually this is denoted by like angle brackets or double square brackets to really show that it's not like a JavaScript property that we traditionally have access to behind the scenes. So when reading this diagram, the most important takeaway is animal is an object which has a type property. Since we created animal as an object, it's going to inherit all of object prototypes, keys and values as a direct result of JavaScript linking those up for us behind the scenes since it was created as an object. Okay, so let's keep going with this. It turns out that it is actually quite useful to get access to this prototype somehow. Now, the fact that it's invisible is kind of annoying. So a lot of browser engines and vendors created these kind of pseudo properties that allow us to access this hidden prototype within the JavaScript engine. So there are a couple of ways to do this. There's an older method and then there's a newer method. The older method is this one right here, where we can do an underscore underscore proto underscore underscore property on an object in JavaScript and get what it points to, which is the prototype of that object. We can also just do this, which is a newer method, which was added to the language after, called object.getPrototype of, and then we pass it the object we're interested in, and it will give us the prototype. Now you can see from this diagram, this is the same diagram as before. Animal is an object with a type property, which has a prototype, which is the object prototype, okay, which in this case is animal's prototype because animal's prototype is the object prototype. And if we try to access animal.underscore proto or this object.getPrototype of the animal, it's going to give us the actual prototype itself. So we can think of both of these as the same thing, first of all, but as values that get us the prototype. Okay, so let's take a look at how that actually works. So I'm going to create getters.js just because we'll see that. And when we get to classes, this is going to kind of be one of the defining features. Clear my console there. I'm just going to copy my animal over just so you don't have to watch me type it. And I'm just going to console.log out the animal just so that we can see it. But what I want to do is show kind of these two things. Okay, so if I do this, if I say console.log animal dot underscore underscore proto underscore underscore, this is a hidden property on animal. You can see I did not create underscore underscore proto on this animal, but JavaScript engine is going to do this for us behind the scenes to allow us to access its prototype. So if I run node getters.js in this case, you can see that we get the object null prototype for the animal. Okay, so in this case, what this is saying is that the animal's prototype, okay, is this thing right here. Okay, now you can imagine the next question is, okay, well, if this is the prototype, right, what is above it, right? Does this also have a prototype, right? That would probably be a question we would ask. So let's take a look, right? I'm going to ask for that prototype. What is its prototype? So I'm going to say dot underscore underscore proto of that thing, right? And this is getting kind of crazy, but let's take a look and you can see that we get null. Okay, so once we reach null, we are at the end of the prototype chain in JavaScript, and there is no further kind of inheritance or prototypical inheritance happening beyond that point. The top of the prototype chain in JavaScript is the object prototype. This is why a lot of people say that JavaScript technically is not an object-oriented language, it's a prototypical language, and everything in JavaScript technically is an object as a result of this prototypical inheritance from the object prototype. Okay, so let's keep going with this. I can also do a object.get prototype of, and I can say animal in this case, and it will give me the same thing. This is line 8 and line 11 are the exact same thing. They're just two methods to do the same thing. One is a newer method and one is an older method. Okay, now what I really want to show you though is something that is going to allow us to look at all of the keys inside of the object, okay, which we saw before. So if I do console.log and I say object.get own property names, very long method name, but this is something that exists on the object itself, which I'm going to get into later, and we can pass it an object. So in this case, animal. This is going to ask us what are the properties that are only on animal and not inside its prototype. So if I run this, we will see that animal has type and num legs, which makes perfect sense, right? If you look at this, animal is right here. It has type of monkey and number of legs of 2. So this totally checks out, right? Let's take this further. Let's copy this line and let's take a look at get proper names of animal dot underscore underscore proto. Now, I want you to think, what is this going to give us? This is really tricky. The hint I'll give you is that the prototype for animal is the object prototype, and everything that an object can do, or all the methods on an object, are available to us inside of animal. Okay, so I'm gonna clear my console, run this one more time, and you can see that there is quite a lot of stuff in here. Okay, you might be wondering where some of the other stuff is, which we'll get to later, which is actually on the object itself, but that is a different topic, which we'll get to shortly. So this is the prototype of animal, which is the object prototype. Okay, you can see that the object prototype has all the different things. It has own property, it has is prototype of, and it has properties enumeral to string value of underscore underscore proto, and then to locale string, right? This means that we can do animal dot any of these things and it will work. That's what these properties are. They are things that are accessible to us on the prototype of animal, which is object, and we can do, for example, animal dot to string, which we saw earlier, and that's going to give us that object, and this is coming from here, from this list of special properties that are on the object prototype, which almost everything in JavaScript inherits from. Okay, perfect. So let's keep going with this. Now, I want to show you kind of what this looks like visually, just to make this extra clear before we get to the static topics. So imagine that we have animal again, type of monkey, and we try to get something that doesn't exist on monkey. What actually happens behind the scenes is this. JavaScript is going to say, okay, I see that you have animal, which is an object. You are asking for the speak method on animal. I'm going to take a look on animal to see if it exists there. Do I see a speak over here? No, right? We don't find a speak over here because it only has type. So animal does not have the speak property. So JavaScript is going to say, okay, I'm not going to worry. I am going to hope that I'm going to find this further up in the prototype chain for animal. So I'm going to check the prototype of animal, which in this case is the object prototype, which is right here. So we're going to land up in this situation. We're going to be looking at this list that we just looked at right here, this one, which is the object prototype list. And we're going to say, is speak inside of here, right? And if it's not, then we're going to keep looking up and up and up until we don't find anything anymore because we're at the null prototype, right? Which means that we have hit the end of the prototype chain and it doesn't exist. If JavaScript reaches this point, we're going to get that speak is not a function on animal, which is what we saw earlier when we tried to do things like hello. Okay. This works for any property, whether it's a method or a regular property value pair. Okay. So if we didn't have number of legs, for example, on our animal, and we looked all the way up here, well, object definitely doesn't have number of legs, so it would actually fail there as well, and we would get number of legs is not defined. Okay, perfect. So let's take a look at what happens. In this case, if we wanted this to work, we would have to do this. Okay, we would have to tell JavaScript that we want to put speak on the prototype of object, for example. Okay, we could also put speak on animal. Now, the question between where do we put this is actually quite an important question because the differences are very important. So let's take a look at what this is actually doing in this case. Let's imagine that we run this code here. We're saying object.prototype is going to have a speak method and it's going to be a function that console logs hi. Then we're going to create an animal, right? And animal.speak, and then miraculously it's going to work, right? This looks kind of like total magic, right? But let's take a look at what's happening behind the scenes in the prototype chain. JavaScript's going to come here. It's going to say, hey, animal, do you have a speak property? And animal's going to be like, nope, sorry, I only have type. You can take a look up though at the prototype and let us know if you find it there. I hope you find it over there. So JavaScript's going to be like, okay, great. I'm going to follow your prototype. I'm going to go up to object prototype, which is the prototype of animal because we created it with curly brackets. Okay. Now on on the object, we actually added a speak property using this code right here. We literally added this property onto the prototype. So when JavaScript looks up here, now it is in that list. We have effectively added it to this list using this code. And JavaScript is going to find that inside of there, and it's going to be like, okay, I'm not going to give you an error because I actually found it. So let's take a look at how this works. If I kind of comment out this code for now, and I say, animal.speak. Okay, what's going to happen is if I run this code, I'm going to get an error, right? I'm going to get an error saying animal.speak is not a function. So this is the error that we get when JavaScript looks all the way up the prototype chain and hits the null and realizes that it's not inside the prototype chain. Okay, so we can technically do this, right? We can say speak, and we can make this a function, and we can do like console.log hi. We could put it inside of animal directly. Okay, and if I do this, you can see that we do get hi, right? However, I want to show you what happens if we take it out of animal. And right before this, I'm just going to put an object.prototype.speak is equal to a function, the same thing I put inside of animal. I'm going to do console.log of hi. Okay, and I'm just going to add from prototype, just so it's super clear this is coming from the prototype. Now, if you look at animal, it does not have this speak function. Okay, I'm really hammering this because it's so important. Animal does not have speak, right? Prototype of animal has speak. That's the object because we created it with curly brackets. So now if I run this code, let's see what happens. We get hi from the prototype, right? Because what's happening in this case is exactly this diagram. It's not being found on the animal object, but it's being found on the prototype of the animal object, which is the object prototype in this case. Okay, so if we created a second animal, animal 2, I'll probably spell correctly, and this animal 2, for example, has a type of, let's say, cat, right? Maybe it doesn't have a number of legs for whatever reason. It's just a slightly different object. What I can actually do with this is I can say animal2.speak as well, right? And now both of these animals can speak through the prototype. This analogy is getting a bit trippy for me, but hopefully that makes sense, right? This is happening because both of these are objects in JavaScript, and we have added this speak function directly to the prototype, which means that every single object in JavaScript is going to have access to this speak function. Now, I do want to mention at this point, this specific case is not advisable. I'm just showing you this for illustrative and demonstrative purposes for the sake of learning this concept. This is not advisable because generally adding things to the base objects and arrays and things like that that are built into JavaScript's prototypes is very dangerous and can lead to very strange code and buggy code if you don't do it correctly. What's the purpose of this, though, is to show you how the prototype chain works so that when we actually create our own custom types of objects, for example, when that's done easier with class syntax, which we're going to look at later, this is actually what happens behind the scenes where we're actually just using these prototypes to inherit from one class or another. Okay, so this is just a precursor to help understand that, as well as understand where these functions come from in JavaScript in general, because we didn't code them ourselves. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. So the way to think about this right here is we are saying, again, we want to modify the object's prototype to have this new property on it called speak. That's going to be a function that console logs something. So now everything that's an object in our code for our JavaScript program is going to have access to that new function. Okay. So I want you to show this example next, because you're probably wondering this whole time, well, Nader, that makes sense and everything, but when you showed us this list, let me show you this list right here, which is get own property names of animal.proto. I'm going to comment that back in, right? When you saw this list right here, right, you can see that speak has been added to this list. I probably should have showed you that earlier, right? So this is directly on the prototype. We don't have things like object.keys or object.entries, or object.values, or object.create. We don't have all these new object functions. Right? So if you think of this, like if we go to object.js in Google, right? And we take a look at a JavaScript object on MDN, for example, right? And I zoom in over here, what you can see is that there's all these functions. Like, where are all of these, right? Object.assign, object.create, object.entries, object.freeze, etc., etc. Right? We've used object.keys before, right? Why don't we see it in our list of properties? It's definitely there. But I want you to notice something. This does not say object.prototype.keys. This is just object.keys, object.is, object.getOwnPropertyNames. Okay? So when you have it like this, if it's not on the prototype, the way to think about it is like this diagram. So let's take a look at all this together. Let's say we have all these methods. We're trying to figure out where they are. We still have our animal, which is of type monkey. Now, animal, as we saw in the previous slide, is going to have a type property, but its prototype is going to set by default to object, to the object prototype, and the object prototype's prototype is going to be the null prototype, or sorry, the null value itself. But what's interesting is that there's actually this object as well. Now, the object itself in JavaScript, this is very similar to an idea of programming languages that use object-oriented programming. This is kind of like a static set of methods, okay? So in the case of an object like this, we have object.assign, we have object.keys, object.values, object.entries, right? These are just properties that are assigned directly to object, okay? And what that means is, if I go back to my code here, I'm going to create a new file. I'll just call this object.js. If I literally do object dot, and then in VS Code at least, I'll get a list of all of the things that are inside of that object to object directly. These are not things that are in the prototype. These are things that are directly in the object. So I can do like object.keys, and I can give it an object, for example, like this, and it would give me a name as an array. Okay. So this is not in the prototype of object. What that means is I can't have a animal, for example, and if the animal has a type of monkey, right? I can't do animal.keys, right? This does not work in JavaScript, right? Because this is asking for animals prototype value or key value pair of keys. It's asking for the property of keys on the animal's prototype. But we know that it's not on the prototype. We know it's just directly on object, okay? So this is very similar to the idea of static methods in other programming languages. There is a difference between the prototype and then these static methods directly. They are literally different objects. However, one of the properties on that object is literally prototype, okay? This is super, super confusing. I know when I first saw this, I was just like, oh, are you kidding me? Like, oh, come on. Like what? Like, this is already such a tricky topic. Why are you doing this to me, JavaScript? Like, please. Like, please just help me out, right? Like, why are you naming all these things the same? Like __ proto, and then you have this prototype property. What is going on, right? So this prototype on object, and we'll see on other things like array and things like that as well, is literally just a regular property. I'm going to say that one more time. It is a regular property. There's nothing special about it except for in the cases of where we use a new keyword, which I'll point at the end of these slides. This prototype property's single job is to point to this thing, which is the actual prototype of that object. Okay, so I'll say that one more time just to be extra clear. This prototype property on object, so object.prototype, is pointing to this prototype right here. That's why in our code, we have to do this. We have to do object.prototype.speak. We're saying go to the prototype property, which itself is like an object because it's the prototype, and then add a new property onto it called speak. Okay, so I want you to think about it in that case when you look at this slide. So in this slide, we have exactly that. We're saying to JavaScript, please go to object, then go to its prototype property. So we're going to go find object, which is this thing, which has all of these properties on it. We're going to find the prototype property. We're going to follow it over here, and we're going to say, hey, please add a new function onto it called speak that does this thing. So we're going to add it to the list of things on the object prototype, which is what everything that's created as an object and in JavaScript inherits from. We're not adding it to here. If we wanted to add it to here, we would not use prototype. So let me show you what I mean. So if I go back to object over here, now if I say object.hello is equal to, and then I could say, for example, like a function, and then this console.logs out hello there, for example, right? Now, this is a property directly on object, okay? So if I try to do animal, oops, wrong spot over here. If I try to do animal.hello, and I try to call it, I'm gonna get rid of this keys because this is gonna break. This is not gonna work. Okay, I'm gonna run this code. That was the wrong code. Run node objects.js. We're gonna see that animal.hello is not a function. Okay, because it's not on the prototype for animal. It is only on the object itself. The only way we can use this is the same way that we use this, right? Let me comment this out so we can show how this works. I'm gonna say object.hello, just like any other property on any other object. It's not going to be magically inherited from if it's not on the prototype in this case. So if I run node object, this, as we expect, would give us hello. This is just regular JavaScript. this you can think of, even though there's an object in here, right, is just regular JavaScript. We're just adding a property onto this object thing, and it's going to be a function that we can call. Okay. If we want to make this work right here, we have to say object.prototype.hello is equal to this function as well. And I'll say hello there, and I'll say from animal, for example, just to show that it's different. Okay, and if I run this code, you'll see that the prototype's hello is what's being run on line 12, and then the actual object's hello is what we can call directly right here on line 14, which is this one right here, which is just a regular property on object. So to really, really, really emphasize this, I'm going to show you the lists. I'm going to show you console.log object.getOwn property names of object as well as animal itself. Okay, as well as animal.proto actually, because that's what I wanted to really show you. .proto. I could do get prototype of, but I'll just go with that. This is gonna be quite a long list, I think, but let me slowly show this here. I might have to do this on a couple lines. So to start, this one right here, okay, this gigantic thing, barely my head covering it there, is line 16. This is all of the property names inside of object, right? Which is this one right here, this thing, this gigantic thing, object.something, okay? Which is actually this gigantic list right here, object.somethings, right? There's a lot there, right? That's what this list is right here. Length, name, prototype, assign, seal, freeze, values, keys, there they all are, right? We were asking where they were. Well, this is where they are, right? If I scroll down a little bit, hopefully we can see this. The second thing right here, which is line 17, the property names for animal, which is line 7 to 9. Well, there's only one thing in animal. There's only type, right? So that makes perfect sense. However, what's interesting is the prototype for animal, animal.__proto. We can see this is barely cut off by my head here. At the very, very end there, you can see that there is hello, right? Which is this hello right here on line 5, not the hello on line 3. Okay, and just to be extra clear, I can say hello 2, for example, and this will be, for example, maybe just a string that says hello, right? And if I run this code again, you can see that hello 2 is now on the prototype, right? But it is not up here on the object itself because we never said object.hello2. Okay, so this one here, line 3, is this one here. This hello and hello 2 are these two right here. And then this type is this one right here. And that all follows this diagram right here. In fact, this is probably the diagram you should freeze into your mind as you're thinking of prototypes and prototypical inheritance in JavaScript, because this is really what it's all about. This prototype value itself, or the __proto on animal, point to this prototype. So if I was to draw an extra thing here on the proto, did I have it over here? This one right here, we can see that it also points to the prototype. Okay, and that's kind of hidden inside of this object. So they both point to this prototype, but this object is different. Okay, now for the setter. One question you probably have is, okay, this is all great and fine and dandy. I think it makes sense. Well, how do we change the prototype of something, right? Is it like frozen? Can we ever change it again once it's set? Can we ever unset it? Can we change it to something else, right? That's a pretty common question. So the answer to that is yes, right? And this is really how this new class syntax of object-oriented programming in JavaScript comes in. It automates a lot of this for us behind the scenes, but we're going to show you here the theory so that it makes a bit more sense to you when you're actually looking at this, and you can appreciate a little bit of what the newer syntax does for us, among other things on top of just this. So if we take a look at this, I'm creating an animal over here. It has a type, but inside of it, I'm creating that proto property directly. So I am saying to JavaScript, hey JavaScript, I know that I used curly brackets right over here to create this animal. And I know that normally, right, what you would do for me as so kind, I really, really appreciate it, is you put the object's prototype as animal's prototype. And, that's great, but, this time I really want you to do something else for me. I want you to set the prototype to the array prototype, right? I know this might be a bit strange, but please trust me and just change the prototype for me so it's no longer object. So what JavaScript's going to do, it's going to just trust us and be like, okay, I hope you know what you're doing. And it's going to set the prototype of this object to the array prototype instead of the object prototype. We can also do it like this using this syntax where we can say set the prototype of the animal to the array.prototype. Okay, and we have to do this because remember, array itself is just the array object that has all the array functions on it. We don't want to set it to that. We want to set it to the prototype of the array. Okay, so if you think of what the array prototype is, well, it has all the things that we can do on array. So if we do an array dot something, we can do things like map and filter and reduce and find and all those nice functions that we're used to on arrays. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. So I'm going to let's just do array.js for this one. And I'm going to create my const animal. It's going to be an object. So this object is going to have a type. And let's just say monkey again. And I'm also going to say now I'm going to underscore proto underscore. And I can do this inside the object or right after the object using the two syntaxes that I showed you, but I'll just do it all in kind of this one object. And set it to the array.prototype. Okay, now this is a bit weird. Okay, so let's see what happens if we do this. So now if I console.log out animal, now clearly this is not an array, right? So some alarm bells should be going off and being like, okay, is this going to break? Like what's going to happen? There's no indices here. I'm very confused. There's no length even. What is happening, right? So let's do a node and array.js. And okay, so interesting. Now we see that this is an array, which is cool, and it's type of monkey. So it's no longer an object of type monkey, it's an array of type monkey. Okay, well, that's interesting. So let's take a look at what the properties are on here. So if I do console.log object.get own property names of my animal, right? And I log this out. Well, all right, so we have type. So that's fine. So proto is kind of hidden from us in this case. And this has something to do with property descriptors, which we'll look at in a future video and when we get to classes and things like that as well. But for now, type, that makes sense. That's fantastic. What if we look at the prototype? So let's go animal dot underscore proto, right? What do we expect to have here? So normally what we expected to see was what we saw before. Right? When we looked at the prototype of animal, in this case with the object, we saw that it was the object prototype, right? But now we change the prototype. It's no longer object, it's an array. So you can clear this, run this one more time, and take a look at that, right? That is totally awesome, right? We have over here all of the prototype properties for an array. This is not for an object anymore. You might notice many of these, right? Push, unshift, splice, join, etc., right? That's because we changed animal's prototype, which normally would be an object, to an array. How cool is that, right? So we can technically do this, right? We can say console.log animal.length, not normal legs. That's not even in this file. Oh, JavaScript, or oh, VS Code in this case. And I run this and you can see the length is 0. Interesting. Okay. Wonder how it got that. Maybe we can do a map. Maybe we can do a reduce. Now there are some tricks we can play with this because technically arrays use like 0, 1, 2, 3 as indices, which are just property names in theory behind the scenes. But I don't want to get too deep down that rabbit hole. Just want to show you something else. The next question we might ask is, okay, so in this case, we have animal and we change the prototype to array. And if we look at the prototype of array, well, what is that? Is that null or is that object, right? So if I go up one more, the prototype.prototype, let's see what we get. And you can see right here, I'm actually going to comment that out. Oh, getting tongue twisted here. Comment out the really, really long array one since we saw that. I'm just going to log out the proto.proto, so one up from the prototype. And look at this, right? Look how awesome this is. What is this, right? This is the object prototype, right? So what we can say is that animal goes to array, and then array goes to object, and then object goes to null, right? So if we take this one step further, right, and I'll just console.log this out just so we can prove this to you. Console.log out animal underscore proto. Can't type today. Underscore proto one more time, right? Because we know 2 up is the object prototype, 3 up should be null, right? Because that is the end of the prototype chain. And look at that, it totally is null. So we have gone from animal to its prototype, which is array, which is what we changed on line 3. And then 1 up from that is the object prototype, which everything inherits from. And then 1 up from that is the null prototype, or just null in general, which is what everything ends at, so that we know we're at the end of the chain. Now that is super, super cool. This is where some of the power of inheritance comes in, and some of the cool things we can do with classes, especially once we can start changing our prototypes for whatever it is that we want beyond the custom objects that are built into JavaScript. Okay, so I want to show you one more thing, just because I'm sure that it's kind of niggling at the back of your mind before I wrap up this video. Now, this is something that we're going to get into in future videos, as I mentioned, but just as a teaser so you can see, because a question you probably has is, how do we create these custom objects, right? We have arrays, we have objects, we have things like dates, we have strings and numbers, right? But how do we create our own custom ones and then actually start inheriting from those? I'm not going to get into this for the sake of length of this video as well as scope of this video, because we're going to look at this when we get to object-oriented programming, as well as things like constructor functions and all that kind of stuff. But just to show you what this looks like and give you another nice visual for this, imagine we have this function and we're going to call it animal. This only works with regular functions in JavaScript, not with arrow functions. And in here, we can use this special keyword, which is actually going to be the topic of the next series of videos after the exercise video for this. So for now, just trust me that this is going to set the property on animal to whatever we pass it in this function. The main difference here is that instead of just calling the function directly, we can call this function using this special keyword in JavaScript called new. We're going to see this when we get to classes, but this is technically what it's actually built off behind the scenes. If I say const monkey is equal to a new animal, and then I give it this value, what we're actually going to get is this prototype chain behind the scenes. We're going to see that we're going to create monkey, and monkey is going to have a type of monkey, and that's prototype for monkey is going to be this animal prototype. Okay, and the animal's prototype is likewise then going to be the object prototype, which is then going to be prototyped by null. Okay, so what we can start doing is creating our own custom versions of things like arrays and objects and numbers in JavaScript, so that we can start adding things to their prototypes or adding things to them directly, like we saw over here with the like static properties. But this becomes really, really powerful. However, to do this without the class syntax can get a little bit tricky, and there's a lot of kind of funky things we need to do to make sure that this idea works properly. However, it is possible, and that's how traditionally it was done in JavaScript. But we're going to start learning the newer syntax with this behind in the back of our minds, so that we understand this idea of prototypical inheritance and prototypes, just so that we know conceptually a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes. So I hope this video was valuable for you and that you learned about prototypes and prototypical inheritance. If you did find it interesting and valuable, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. As well, I'd love to hear in the comments, kind of, have you seen this idea of prototypes before? Have you been confused by it? Have you always kind of wondered, like, what's the difference between these things? Like, what's this prototype? What's underscore proto, and what's underscore or what's dot prototype, right? I think seeing it kind of in this way over here really helps demonstrate, or specifically this one as well, what this idea is. And I'd love to know if this is useful to you, if you'd like more visuals like this to really help understand the concept. As well, I'd love to hear if you've actually used this yourself before to add your own things to the prototype in JavaScript in your own projects. Now, what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to get more practice with this idea of prototypes and this prototype chain and prototypical inheritance through a bunch of exercises where we're actually going to kind of pull this apart into more complicated examples just to really make sure that we understand it. And this is going to set us up really, really, really well for classes, which we're going to get right after we look at the idea of the this keyword, which I was hinting at over here, because this idea, no pun intended, is actually one that definitely trips up a lot of programmers new to JavaScript, or even ones that are more seasoned, because there's just a lot of nuance to this simple word in JavaScript that really can cause a lot of bugs if not used properly, but can also be quite powerful if used correctly. And this idea of prototypes and classes and objects and all these different things in JavaScript really leverage this idea behind the scenes to make everything run smoothly. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I will see you in the series of exercises for prototypes next. See you later.